Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us for this live session on TikTok. Super excited to discuss with you today the Shroud of Turin. As you know, we just hosted an 8-day event here at the Bible Seminary in Katy, Texas, where we had somewhere around 10,000 people who came through our exhibit, plus the seminars that we did and the other live events. But since we posted the virtual tours and cut out some reels and so forth, you guys have really gone wild, and we've kind of lost count. We know there's over 500,000. So that's why we wanted to do this today, to just try to address some of the many questions. I think we're over 800 questions that have come in out in various social media, and most of them on TikTok, and to interact with you guys. So hopefully you're watching right now, and you'll send a note out, invite some of your friends to join you, and this will be an awesome next 30 minutes together as we talk about the Shroud of Turin. And I have with me today one of my super students, and she's also the student services coordinator here at the Bible Seminary. She's also a newlywed, so she's really famous. But I started to say Emma Clodfelder, but it's actually Emma Zakroff. So Emma, welcome.
Hello.
So if you hear voices coming from afar, that may be voices in your head, or it may be Emma, or either and or both. So Emma, if there's something pertinent to say, just jump right in.
Yeah, right now we have 4 viewers, which is exciting. So if anybody has any questions that they want to drop in the comments, you're more than welcome to answer them, right?
You said we have 4,000 viewers right now?
We actually have 5 viewers.
5 viewers, okay.
We have 5 viewers.
Well, this is good. All right. The Bible says don't despise that it has small beginnings. That's
right.
cool.
That's right.
Glad for you 5 guys that are there. And please shoot us a question or a comment or whatever. We'd love to react to that. Why don't we look at a few artifacts while we're letting people... I know it is after work. Everybody's sort of going to be a little bit late signing in. I'm sure there'll be millions in just a few minutes who will be joining us.
Yeah.
But this, speaking of the Shroud of Turin, this is a Roman flagrum. Now, the reason we know exactly what these look like is that we have literary descriptions of scourging from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century. And we also have painted depictions of this, for example, in catacombs and other places where they're actually showing people be scourged. So it's not always 3 strands. Sometimes there can be 5 strands or even more. And they are embedded with lead weights, and you can see this real clearly on the Shroud of Turin, where Jesus was whipped. We think of about 700 wounds, and where these lead weights leave those indentations on the body. We kind of tried to correct the record that there's not really any proof that there was glass or bone or other things interwoven here, even though I've heard that all my life. But so far we have no proof to substantiate that. So it would have been a whip like this that at least 2 of the members of the Quaternion, the 4-man team who did the scourging, would have used sort of simultaneously as they are scourging Jesus of Nazareth. So this is what this looks like. These things will actually preserve forever if you're in a dry environment. And I'm trying not to pierce myself with the crown of thorns. We'll give you a blood sacrifice here today. And I assure you, my blood is not AB blood like the Shroud of Turin. Mine is the most common type that there is. This is a typical 1st century sword. And we don't know if this was exactly the kind that the soldiers would have used. But we do know that it went between the 4th and 5th rib on the right side. And since it was Adam whose rib was injured, I think it should be me who takes this spear in the side, unless you want to volunteer.
No, it's all yours.
Okay.
Go for it.
So just picture this. I mean, between the 4th and 5th rib, just putting that there, you just can't imagine the pain that must have caused. And it pierces in, and I think it's called the pericardial fluid, if I'm not mistaken, that then flows blood and water out of the side. It's a real distinguishing mark. So when we're talking Shroud of Turin, it's either all or nothing, because the specific wounds, like the crown of thorns and the spear, other crucifixion victims don't have. And by the way, very few crucifixion victims are scourged, as far as that goes. So the scourging, the crown of thorns, and then the wound to the side, either it's Jesus of Nazareth or it's nothing. Now, speaking of the crown of thorns, it's really a helmet of thorns, And it would look something like this. And, kind of in our Western mind, we think crown of thorns, like a victor's crown, or wreath of some kind. But that wasn't it. I mean, they wove together a bunch of desert thorns, what we would call Judean or Bethlehem area thorns. And these things are huge. I don't know if you can see the size of these. And it's a wonder that I haven't pricked myself with one of these yet. But this is then forced down on the brow of Jesus. And I can count about 29 distinct wounds on the scalp area of Jesus. And even though he has a full head of hair, look at the size of these thorns. So someone asked me, like, well, why are we seeing blood spatter on the back of the scalp if he has a full head of hair? Well, this is why.
Yeah, makes sense.
You push this through, you're going to have that that wound. Of course, Jesus bears this to represent his removing of the curse from humanity, that which was placed in the garden after the fall. And lastly, well, I don't know, do we also have a Pontius Pilate coin here?
Oh, I didn't grab it.
Okay. Well, we were going to show you a Pontius Pilate coin, but maybe next time. Because on the 1898 photos of Segunda Pia, you can see the Pontius Pilate coin in the eye sockets, as was the custom in Second Temple burials. And this is an interesting nail. And believe it or not, it's similar to what we have in several crucifixion instances. And we have Antigonus Mattathias, for example, who has 2 nails this size through the palm of his hand. So 2 nails in one hand. So it's not like there was a standardization. So one was about right here and the other was about right here. And they went in and then they sort of bent them to the side to like pin the hand to the cross to keep the victim from writhing. Or they can be longer nails, and they can go like all the way through the radius in the ulna and literally hold the weight of the body on the cross as well. So here's our nails, our crown of thorns, our spear, our flagrum. And in the museum, we have a coin of Pontius Pilate that you're not going to get to see. But
I know, sorry.
That's just the way it goes. All right.
We have 9 viewers right now.
Okay.
So
well, anyone in a chatty mood?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, they can drop them. Barry in the comments is asking, it's a little off topic, but it's the only question we have right now.
He wants to ask how long you've been married or what?
No, he wants to ask, do people choose what they believe?
Okay. Well, I think so. I believe the Bible tells us that we have free will, or at least limited free will. Perhaps there's a proclivity or direction of our life, a bent for our life that God has. But within that, there's certainly free will that he allows us to exercise. So I think the simple answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Angela is asking if square nails, she says square nails were used by the Romans, correct?
Right. So square nails like the one I just showed you are very typical of the late Second Temple period. So it's a square shaft and a square head. Now with time, they're worn, it kind of gets rounded, but initially they're perfectly square, and that's one of the diagnostics. On into the Byzantine period, you'll find these square. By, say, the Crusader period, you're starting to get round nails. But yeah, they're definitely square at this time.
Okay.
And interestingly, a lot of the nails that we have human bone still adhering to them.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And they're in the heels, right? They're always found in the heels, not through the tops of the feet.
That's right. It's called the calcaneus bone. So it's from the outside in through the calcaneus. It pierces through that bone. But in the examples that we have, it never breaks it. It just pierces through it. And then on the Shroud of Turin, if you look carefully at the photos that we've posted, you'll see that that's where the wound is on the Shroud of Turin. The point being that in the medieval period, they always depicted it through the top or the dorsum of the feet. So that argues against it being a forgery, the fact that it's in the correct spot.
Yeah. So speaking of that, there is, let me find the comment.
I'm scrolling.
I'm scrolling. Let's see. Okay, so Den is asking, so it was my understanding that the carbon dating disputes that this could be Jesus. Is this new information?
Okay, the carbon dating in 1988 initially suggested that this was a medieval forgery, even though so many other lines of evidence pointed towards its authenticity. Since that time, there have been at least a dozen peer-reviewed studies that have disputed and really disproven the radiocarbon dating done in the 1980s. And I'll give you a brief summary of it.
Yeah.
Problem number one is that it was taken from a patch from the fire that the shroud had been in. And we know that because the British Museum had the control samples. They were forced to turn it over after a lawsuit. And in the control samples, because you test half and you keep half, there were cotton threads in there. And so that was the proof that this was the cotton thread that had been used to patch the shroud. So they ended up contaminating it in the process and testing that. Secondly, it was in a fire. And once something has been in a fire, then it changes the radiocarbon absorption ratios. And then thirdly, it's been touched by thousands of people. Like when you've been with me, in the field when we're collecting radiocarbon samples, and we do this all the time. Like we're wearing gloves and we've got stainless steel instruments.
Right.
We're super careful not to touch it. Well, imagine that thousands of people have touched this shroud over the years. So between the smoke and the touching and then the cotton fibers, you have a contaminated specimen essentially.
Yeah. So someone is asking, what new science/analysis would you like to see have done since it's been so long, 1978?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I'm tempted to say more radiocarbon dating, but I'm hesitant to do that because, you destroy a little piece of the shroud every time that you do the radiocarbon dating. And if it's contaminated, then what good's it going to do to keep cutting off more pieces, right?
Yeah.
However, we do have brand new technologies that are coming to light all the time, like the WAX, the wide-angle X-ray scattering technology that in 2023 demonstrated that the shroud was first century. And it was a blind study of dozens of textiles. The scientists knew the dates of them, and they mixed in with them textiles from Masada, which is obviously first century, and the Shroud of Turin. And so the tests were clear. Here's what they are. The scientists have to do it blindly, and they nailed every single one of them and dated the Shroud of Turin to the first century. The point being, the cellulose degrades at a predictable rate in textiles, something we didn't know in the past.
Right. So tell us a little bit, you at first were a skeptic, right?
Well, that's right.
You didn't believe in the shroud and you changed your mind. So tell us about that.
And it's kind of hard, to when you're on the record as having one position.
Right.
But I just sort of thought it was a Catholic relic, or it was too good to be true, or I didn't want to be that guy, or I had a reputation as an archaeologist. But I just had a sense about 15 years ago that I wasn't practicing what I preach. Okay, so I was saying a scientist needs to be open-minded. We have a hypothesis, we test that, and we test it ourselves. We don't take what other people said, and so I hadn't done that. I tried to study it with fresh eyes, and I came out on the other side as a believer in the authenticity of the shroud. Once I solved the problem with the radiocarbon dates, that was the big thing.
Right.
And then everything else fell into line.
So to you, that's the biggest hang-up that people have.
It was my biggest hang-up, and it is by far the biggest hang-up out there. And if people are looking for an excuse not to believe in the authenticity of the shroud, let's face it, if this really is the burial garment of Jesus, then there are some ramifications of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
there is a God. He may have died in my place.
Yeah.
He rose from the dead. Maybe he actually has a moral claim on my life.
Yeah.
I mean, those are tough life conversations to think through.
Yeah. It's definitely a big deal.
Yeah.
Do you feel like in the conversations that you have, is there anything else that people are hung up on, or is that the main one?
Well, that's the main thing that you'll hear from people. Once in a while, people will raise the fact that this Z-twill pattern that we have, like the herringbone pattern, there's no other examples of this that have ever been found.
Right.
And so then it's not have ever been found in the first century, therefore it's not first century. But my response is, not only have they never been found in the first century, they've never been found in any century.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So it doesn't prove anything. All it proves to me is that Joseph of Arimathea must have been really rich, because that's the word the Bible uses to describe him. He's rich, and he believes this is the Son of God. He has bought a very expensive garment to bury him in.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the comments on our previous video is seriously doubting that the cross weighed 125 pounds.
Okay.
What is your response to that?
Okay, so we tried to quantify this because we have beams, and we know what first century beams were like. If you had a Herodium, I was there when they opened up Herodium after 2,000 years. It had been sealed, and because it's dry around there, I just couldn't believe it. The beams that were holding up the support beams, you would have thought they were just been built a few years ago. I mean,
Yeah.
it's unbelievable. So we do have beams from that time period. We today have beams even from the Temple Mount from the first century that survived. And we can check those out. So you kind of take the weight of that overall beam, and then you estimate the size of what the patibulum would have been. I mean, if it's not 125 pounds, it's close to it,
Right.
plus or minus 10 pounds or something like that.
So you're saying that they didn't carry the full cross. It was just the cross beam that they would have carried.
That's right. What's called the patibulum. So the vertical beam called the stipes or the staticulum, that stays in the ground at all times. It's about maybe almost 2 feet in the ground to secure it.
Right.
When they nail, or in some cases tie the victim to this patibulum, this crossbeam, they then lift it up and they attach it to the stipes. So the vertical beam is always there. Now here's something that we talked about in the seminar, but not at the actual exhibit, and that's that the victim is almost eye level. We think we've seen this in movies or in art that, the victim is up here and the people are down here.
Right.
That's a 9-foot beam, 2 feet of it are in the ground. And then by the time the person is nailed, you're maybe slightly looking up, but you're almost looking them in the eyes.
Wow.
So like when Jesus says, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. They're right there.
Right. And so when they said that they lifted up the stick with the sponge, with the sour vinegar, can you explain that? Because that makes me think they're holding it up high with him in the sky.
Right. No, but actually they are holding it, but just like right there.
Yeah.
Because if he's as high as it's been depicted, they wouldn't have even been able to reach him. Now, in this sponge on a stick, the stick's only about this long. And then the sponge is on the end of it. What's used in Roman toilets all throughout the first century, and Jewish toilets in the Roman period as well. So everybody has a sponge on a stick. And so I think what they have done is they've essentially taken their toilet paper, if you will, and filled it full of wine, and someone who is extremely dehydrated offered him a drink if he's willing to suck it out of this sponge. It's part of the shame that Jesus bears on the cross.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them right now. We'll answer any questions live.
Please.
But until then,
we give a bonus if they do it live, right?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
it's exciting. And if until then, we'll
Right.
scroll back and see what we find. A lot of comments are just talking about how they are so humbled by the shroud and what they see. And they're really surprised that Jesus is 5'11".
That's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah, that's shocking.
I was shocked to learn that myself. So you have AB blood, which is the rarest blood type, and then the height. Now, this is really interesting because we go back and we have examined anthropologically the bones in all these first century tombs, okay? And I'm writing a new article right now on trauma in the late Second Temple period where I've gone back and looked at all the trauma victims in all these tombs. So let's take the famous Yehohanan tomb where he's crucified under Pontius Pilate. He has the nails through his heel bones from the outside in. Well, in that same tomb, we have dozens of burials. And the average man is about 5'6", 5'7". The average woman is around 5 foot, maybe slightly less than that. But within that tomb, I think there were 54 people in that one tomb because it's ossulegium. They're gathering bones, and so you can put multiple skeletal remains in one ossuary is placed into a niche. Anyway, within that tomb, even though the average woman is about 5 foot tall, there was one woman who was 5'6.5", and there was one man who was 5'11".
Right. So it's not like out of the world.
Right. It's just more rare then than it would be now, I guess.
Okay.
But we have plenty of examples of it.
Yeah. Okay. In this video, you also talked about how there were coins on the eyes of Jesus of Pontius Pilate. This person's asking, why did they put the coins of Pontius Pilate in his eye sockets?
I know, that's a great question. I don't know that they consciously chose the coins of Pontius Pilate, but they did get coins, and this was a common practice in the late Second Temple period. We think of them as being like non-superstitious, pious or whatever. They had all kinds of superstitions. Emma, they're burying people with crucifixion nails. Joseph Caiaphas himself, outside his ossuary, there are crucifixion nails with human bones still adhered to them. Wow. And there are almost 200 examples that I know of of burials from that time with crucifixion nails next to the bodies. They think they ward off evil spirits. Well, if they're superstitious, why should we think it weird that they're using the superstition of coins in the eye sockets too? I mean, in Greek mythology, you pay the boatman, Charon, the boatman who's going to take you across the river Styx. But the Jews have adopted this practice, and how did they know it was a coin of Pontius Pilate? I don't know if they didn't do it consciously or just randomly chose a coin. Right. But it does tell us that a forger in the Middle Ages would have never known what a coin of Pontius Pilate was, and would he have been able to do that?
Right. Yeah.
And let me just say, you only see this in the 1898 photos of Segundo Pia. The later 1978 photos of Barry Schwartz and the Sturt Project, you can't see it in those. And so it appears that the shroud had degraded over that time, because it still wasn't being protected from the elements. I mean, now it is, of course, carefully protected. But wow, how sad that there was a loss of quality.
Yeah.
Think how clear it would have been 2,000 years ago.
That's what I'm saying. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Danielle D is asking, is AB blood rare? I wonder if he was Rh negative.
That's a good question. It's very rare. We could look it up right quickly and see how rare, but it is the rarest type of blood that there is, AB blood. And I don't know the answer to the second part of the question. But yeah, super rare. When we were doing tours, we would have about 100, 125 at a time that would be in the area. And I would often ask, is anyone in here have AB blood? And either it was no one or, one person in a crowd of that size. So I would guess it's about 1%.
Yeah, this says 1% of the U.S. population.
Well, there you go. Well, that's kind of what our anecdotal answer would be, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Jones.jimd is asking, can you talk about the face cloth and its relationship to the shroud?
Okay, so we have four Greek words used in the New Testament for burial garments. So you have the orthonia, which is like the collective arrangement or assemblage of burial garments. And there's three parts of the orthonia. You have the sindon, which is the shroud itself, about 14 feet long, 4 feet wide. You have the headpiece that's called the sudaria. And then you have the keredai, which are like the wrappings that go around the body. They don't wrap the body real tight. Like Lazarus was able to walk out of the tomb, but not very well. And they said, turn him loose and let him go. So three parts of the assemblage, collectively they're called the orthonia.
Okay.
So when we think about the headpiece itself, what it does is it's not inside the shroud, it's over the shroud. Okay. And it ties the jaw shut. And they were paranoid about their jaws gaping open for eternity. Okay. And once rigor mortis releases, and that's about 40 hours when rigor mortis releases. And incidentally, the man in the shroud, Jesus, I believe, was still in rigor mortis.
Wow.
And so this indicates that the resurrection took place somewhere around 39 hours, which is exactly what I had predicted from the biblical account when he dies Friday afternoon to when he rises on Sunday morning. That's about 39 hours, and rigor mortis starts to wear off around 40 hours.
Wow.
So what they don't want is when rigor mortis wears off for the limbs to go hanging off the side. So they use these wrappings.
Sure. And it gets all mushy and gross after,
Right. So this headpiece, the sudaria, keeps the jaw closed, and then it wraps over the head. But it's outside the shroud, not inside the shroud. But what's our questioner's name, Mike?
Jones.
Jones. Guess what the blood type is on the sudarium of Oviedo? If the sudarium of Oviedo is indeed the authentic one in Spain today, so AB. No one knew what blood types were until modern times.
Right.
We did not know there were different blood types. And so the fact that the shroud and the sudarium of Oviedo both have AB blood on them, that's a pretty powerful piece of evidence there.
Have they DNA tested the blood?
No, because the DNA testing is so new. We just started doing it in archaeology, within the last decade and really the last 5 years that we have. So there has been no new blood extracted. And, because let's say you're the custodian of the sudarium or of the shroud, are you going to allow people to partially destroy the blood of Jesus if that's indeed what it is, right?
Right. So it's not that we can't do it. It's that there are rules around the shroud and who's allowed to touch it and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be done because there's enough. What you do is you take acid-free tape, and with that acid-free tape, you put it on a textile, and then you lift off, and you get limestone particles, pollen. That's how we know what the pollens are, and the limestone particles, which is like argonite. And then if you get enough blood like that, then yes, you can do DNA testing. So I think it will happen. Brand new peer-reviewed study, April 1st, came out. What's today? The 14th? So
The 14th, yeah.
two weeks ago, and right before Easter, on the DNA on the shroud. So there is a lot of DNA on the shroud because so many people touched it.
Yeah.
Kissed it and cried and hugged it and all kinds of things over these years. So there's a lot of human DNA. And the interesting thing in this study was that it was disproportionately from India.
Interesting.
And which, it makes you kind of stop and think, like, it must have been in India at some point. Perhaps it was actually made in India.
Yeah.
And then, there are trade routes between India and Judea at that time. Perhaps it was made there, or perhaps it went there, some would say, with the Apostle Thomas or something like that. So this ongoing peer-reviewed research is just coming out all the time, and we're learning more about it.
And I mean, it is the most studied artifact in the world, right?
I can't find anything else that's been more studied than the Shroud of Turin.
Right.
And I would just encourage people to look at all the weight of evidence. And if you can get past the radiocarbon dating, and I think we've proven that it's flawed, that it's contaminated, if you can get past that and look at the overall weight of evidence, I think it's pretty compelling that it's an authentic artifact.
So what's the implications of that? So the world knows, and everybody I've spoken to, they have heard of the shroud, whether or not they believe it's true.
Right.
What is the implications of it being true? What does that mean for us?
Well, we don't have to have a physical artifact to believe, but the disciples did. At the end of John's Gospel, it says that when he entered the tomb, he saw the garments, and then he believed.
Right.
Isn't that interesting?
That's crazy.
He saw the Othonia, the garments, and then he believed. And so I think for many people who have perhaps been told, oh, it's a fraud, it's a hoax, or whatever, it is a point of them considering faith and considering the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And if someone wants to be a Christian, those are the things you have to believe. I mean, you can have your own crazy ideas about all kinds of things, but you have to believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. That's what makes you a Christian. Right. And in this one artifact, we have all three of those things, I believe. Evidence of death, burial, and resurrection.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Cara Marie says, I would love to see the results of that. I think she's talking about the DNA testing. But they won't until technology has improved, unfortunately. Do you think that's true? Well,
probably is. Again, I would be reluctant. If I'm the custodian of the shroud, I want to be really confident that the technology is good enough that with this tiny samples that we're going to get, because I'm not going to cut another piece of that off. Acid-free tape, I'm willing to do that and to lift, and to test. But probably going to wait a little bit because it's still in its infancy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There was a comment that I read off of our video, and it said the final truth is Yeshua was an Indian sage who taught Sanatana Dharma, a way of life based on compassion, love, kindness, and nonviolence in serving others.
Well, I think this person is stretching that a bit far. You can only stretch a shroud so far.
Right.
You can say that, there was some Indian connection. That doesn't mean that Jesus was in India. It means that the garment was in India. And so to try to connect those philosophical beliefs from India in the first century, it's interesting. We can look at the Han Dynasty in China that's at the time and what they believed and what was going on in India. We know that there was active movement, around these areas from Africa to India and all over the Mediterranean world. But I think that's stretching it a bit far.
Yeah. Cara Marie just responded. She said, she's talking about there's no technology that won't destroy the DNA or the shroud. Do you feel like there will be a technology that we could use later on that would not destroy the shroud? or is
Probably, you know how these things go. Everything gets smaller and better, but I'm not sure if Cara Maria is correct or not. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but my understanding is that, and I personally have done these samples to take limestone evidence and so forth. I don't see why it would destroy. If you can with acid-free tape lift blood off of there, I don't know why it destroys the shroud. But maybe she knows something I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe she's a scientist and knows more than I do about that.
Yeah, that's possible. Well, it is 6 o'clock on the dot, so we'll probably end it here. And if you have anything to say.
Well, I appreciate you guys tuning in. This has been a lot of fun. Hope that you'll share this with your friends and tune in to the Bible Seminary, our 3J Museum. And if you will, share our videos out on social media on the Shroud of Turin. And keep those questions coming. We're excited that you joined us for this event.
Yeah, great.
Thanks.
All right.
All right.
It. Yeah. We'll just turn it off then, I guess. I don't know where the off button is.
Oh, not there.